I want to therefore appeal to our youths particularly. Please and please and please, we must not take the laws into our hands and allow people to use us to destroy ourselves.
The governor then addressed journalists shortly after the meeting with the monarch.
What we will be doing in the days ahead is to promote the culture of dialogue amongst our people, because I believe that if there had been sufficient dialogue, this kind of carnage would have been averted. We want to therefore appeal to community leaders to rise to the occasion.
Perpetrators of this dastardly act and their sponsors will not be tolerated henceforth, as assured by Governor Caleb Mutfwang. All hands must be on deck to restore the dignity of Plateau State. Bonham Joshua, TVC News.
The contest for the 2024 governorship election in Edo State is expected to be keen as major contenders and the pretenders who had all embarked on campaigns on different platforms continue to sell their aspiration. The All Progressives Congress has quite a large number of aspirants. Respondent Habib Lawal reports.
Battle for the #1 seat in Edo State has started, and activities in Edo political scene is gaining momentum. The Independent National Electoral Commission on 23rd September 2023 released its timetable for the governorship election, paving the way for would-be aspirants as they intensify consultations ahead of party primaries slated for February this year. Although the APC has had consultations meeting with stakeholders and some of the aspirants, and suggested plans to streamline the number that will participate in the primary. Supporters of one of the aspirants, retired Major General Charles Ahiaviri, says it is important the party gives an equal opportunity to everyone.
APC has been in power for 12 years, but it's pertinent to note that when you have a relay, the first person that raises for you might be the best that you have. It doesn't mean everybody will raise on the same capacity. Adam Shomole did well when he started. He gave back to another person who obviously was retrogressing. What we are clamoring for now is a government that can take us back to the next level. That's the summary.
This is the right time to fill the best Edo House. So, not much to say, much has been said by Egile and Honorable. I think everybody knows the reason why we are here. So we are bringing out the best for this election.
Some analysts and watchers have argued that governorship tickets among political parties should be thrown open to allow competence, capacity, excellence and merit to be the major yardstick to picking a flag bearer. Habib Lawal, TVC News, Abuja.
Let's take a short break, and when we return, it will be time to speak with our guest of the day, Dr. Kabiru Adamu, a security expert and managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited, on the continued killings in Plateau State. I'll be right back. Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. At least 30 people have been killed in renewed violence in the north-central Plateau state. This senseless killings and burning of houses are continued in Mango town of Mango local government area of Plateau state, despite the 24-hour curfew imposed by the government. Killings on the Plateau have escalated since 2021, and sadly, this is the second of such attack in a month. Tonight, I am joined by Dr. Kabir Adamu, security expert, managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited. Dr. Adamu, good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and it's so good to see you again.
My pleasure. Good evening.
Right. So before we get into the kind of our focus tonight, as a security professional, help us paint a picture of the security situation in Mango local government area and Plateau state as a whole.
At the moment, as you are aware, today is the third day that there has been a 24-hour curfew in place in Mango local government, and this followed a spate of attacks, which I would describe as inter-community violence between two sides that are divided both by ethnicity and to an extent by religion. Now, at the beginning of that violence, the state government declared a curfew, where it's very difficult to determine the number of people that have been killed. This is the nature of inter-community violence. People are killed as a result of their identity, and because sometimes it's not reported, they are buried almost immediately, especially for the Muslims among them. It has become extremely difficult to determine the number of those that have been killed. The curfew is still in place. Even as today, we monitored or picked up reports of these types of killing between both sides, actually. So that, I think, at the moment is the situation. In the town itself, Mango town, some sense of stability and peace has been restored. But as you move further out into the villages, these types of targeted inter-community attacks are ongoing, where persons of different divides as a result of either their ethnicity or religion are targeted, and sadly they are killed.
Right, thank you. This last killing that occurred on Tuesday was sparked by a dispute between a native and a Fulani herder in Mango. My first question is, what really is the issue among the people that makes peace look like a tall dream? And juxtaposing this with a report we played earlier where the governor says, well, I hope I'm able to quote him correctly, he says there are people with intention to divide us. It is until they divide us, they can get what they want. What exactly do these words mean to you?
Okay, the first part of the question, the issue of who is a settler and who is an indigenous, unfortunately, has not been settled in Plateau State, even though it's been settled in our constitution. And I say this with all sense of responsibility. I mean, at the moment, there are persons from different states that are members of the State Assembly in Lagos. And if I'm right, I don't know if it's still the case, there are persons who are not Yorubas that are at the moment representing Lagos at the Federal Assembly. Point I'm trying to make is because this issue is embedded and complied with in a place like Lagos, it hasn't become a challenge. But as you go further out, as you go into places like Plateau State and several parts of north-central Nigeria, that issue is very strong, and the provisions of the Constitution are not being complied with, they are not respected. So there are certain categories of people that are identified as settlers, others are identified as indigents, and their rights are different, as it were. And so this is part of the challenge, the access to political power, access to land, access to so many other things that determine whether you are a Nigerian, how you enjoy governance is defined by these two terms, whether you're indigent or you are a settler. And unfortunately, I think that's the first thing that is a driver of this unfortunate circumstances that we have in Plateau State. Now, the second point, which I must also say with all sense of responsibility, during the February presidential election and the March governorship election in 2023, a lot of negative mobilization was done along these two lines that I've described earlier on, along ethnic and along religious lines. Unfortunately, it left the state further divided. And I remember cautioning ahead of the elections that post the elections, whoever wins would find it extremely difficult because he will have in his hands, or her hands, in his hands anyway, because there was no female candidate, a state that is divided along these two lines. And so he would probably spend 2 years or thereabout trying to manage the consequence of this negative mobilization along these two lines. So that's number two. Number three is the existence of ethnic militias that have been extremely weaponized. These ethnic militias have access to weapons. They have become instruments for the political outcomes. And I say this with all sense of responsibility. Politicians either indirectly or directly instigate them to act in certain instances. And I don't mean just those that are holding political offices. The chain of political command goes down all the way to certain persons in villages and wards. And so they use these ethnic militias for, to create circumstances that would favor certain political outcomes. And then the fourth one is the existence of what I have called marauding criminals that are being engaged sometimes by these ethnic militias or their controllers, the politicians that I talked about. So where, for instance, they feel that these ethnic militias don't have the capacity to achieve the kind of political results they would wish, then these criminal groups would also come into place. Now, I've also heard of the theory that this may be resource-based. It is possible that it is resource-based, and that means, for instance, access to land. And then, of course, even the mineral resources that are supposedly, deposited within the Plateau State. But that theory, for me, does not hold water in the sense that Plateau State has always had minerals. Tin, and I think steel to an extent, and columbite were a large deposits in Plateau State. And I know one of the first places that the federal government invested in the mining sector was in Plateau State, actually a mining corporation, if I'm right, a tin corporation in Plateau State. So the fact that it's being mentioned now, I don't think that's the only reason. So all of this, plus the existence of small arms and light weapons. Now, because the conflict in Plateau State has lasted over a very long period, access to weapons has become a common thing. There is a gun running, I would say, channel that is feeding that. And so you have communities, individuals who are armed. One of the persons who was interviewed did mention that she had gunshots and flying everywhere, and that is a common phenomenon when there is conflict. So the number of weapons in circulation in the hands of persons who are not entitled to have weapons is extremely huge in Plateau State. Now, these are this and then several other reasons that maybe in the course of the conversation I will mention. But I would want to cap all of this to say that in the past, judicial commissions have been, instituted in Plateau State, both administrative and judicial commissions, and they've submitted reports. They've identified all of the issues I've mentioned. I hate to say, as far as I know, that none of the recommendations of those commissions have been implemented. So the point I'm trying to make is there appears to be an absence of political will to address these root causes that I've identified.
All right, I get that, Dr. Damu, but let me be clear. Are you in any way saying the conversations as to whether or not these attacks are more economic than ethnic or religious should be thrown out?
No. All I'm saying is that we should disaggregate the reasons for the attack. The simplification of the reasons is not helping us in any way. If we ignore all of these elements that I've mentioned, then sadly the issues will not be addressed. In addressing the issues, we should understand that there is not just a single factor that is driving it. Everything I've mentioned is a factor. And if we're going to come to some solution, then we have to put all of those reasons on board. What happened in Barrick, in Ladi, Riom, and to an extent Bokos, is very different from what is happening in Mangu at the moment. It's a combination of several factors, just like I've listed them. And so putting them on the table, and the amazing thing is that all of these factors have been identified in those commissions of inquiry, the administrative and judicial ones that I mentioned. And so it's not new that it's coming from me. I'm just highlighting them.
Right. So considering the kinds of carnage in Plateau State over the years, I mean, innocent lives as well as properties have been lost. Now, when these attacks happen, all we hear are speculations of possible cause. Is it a time Nigerians knew exactly what and why residents of Plateau are being killed and who these people are?
I think I have attempted to tell you why. I know why the violence in Plateau State is happening, and I just gave you a diagnosis of the reason. But more importantly, I'm a private individual. I'm not a government official. So the responsibility for telling why lies with the government. And I indicated earlier on that commission of inquiry at the state level, and if I remember well, at the federal level, both administrative and judicial have been instituted, and they have submitted their reports. Now, some of these commissions were headed by highly respectable persons. I think the Nikki Toby report is one of them. The former and late, a former governor and late, a one-time chairman of the People's Democratic Party, Solomon Lar, if I remember well, I named them. Several of them have investigated the issues in Plateau State. They've identified the drivers, they've identified the causes, they put recommendations. So this is not hidden. That responsibility is left to government. A white paper should have been produced from those reports and then implemented. I am not aware that a white paper has ever been presented. I'm not aware that the recommendations are implemented. So perhaps it's an opportunity for the current governor to be bold, to harmonize these reports, because of course, these things are transient, they change. So maybe some of the reports, there are new things that have emerged. There may be a need to perhaps put together a team, a committee to harmonize those reports. And if there are reasons or causes that were not captured in those reports because of their emergence now, include them, and then be bold enough to implement the recommendations. If that's not done, then the legislature too has that responsibility, both at the state level and at the federal level. But the point I'm trying to make is the government has that responsibility to come out and tell Nigerians what is happening, and then more importantly to address the reasons.
All right. So one of the reasons I had to ask that question again is because where the police have arrested 9 suspects in connection to the attack in Mangu local government area. I'd like to know the impact of this. And also not forgetting that some suspects were also arrested in connection with the last attack on the Plateau in December. Why do we only hear about the arrest and nothing more after that? Is this the failure of the criminal justice system?
Yes, that's one of the causes of the conflict actually in Plateau State. Like I said, when I was listing them out, there were others that I hadn't mentioned. So that's one of them, the failure of both the traditional justice system and then, of course, the more institutionalized criminal justice system. In the past, if there is a conflict between a harder, community, as it were, and then the farmer community, the traditional justice system will step in and nip that conflict in the bud. Sometimes it's just the payment of compensation for destroyed crops. In the case of life lost, it would require something more advanced. But it will be addressed at that level. Then we're waking up to a situation today where both the traditional justice system and then the more institutionalized criminal justice system is not arresting offenders, neither is it punishing them. We've been told by the military, and I'm quoting the military more or less in a release on January 25th, when they cited a altercation, as it were, between herders and a native, a Magavul native, which is the local language in Mangu State. And the narrative by the military said the native, Magavul native, was on his motorbike when he encountered a herder group, and there was an accident and maybe some cows died, and that the result of that, plus some other factors they listed, is the reasons why we saw the number of deaths. So first off, who was that herder person? What happened after that? Who were the persons who armed themselves? Have arrests been made? Why in that briefing was all of these questions not answered? And I think our media team too, they also need to ask those critical questions, because that press briefing was an engagement between the media and the military. I think they should have asked critical questions around, was the person arrested? Those who followed up with the attacks, have they been arrested? Now, with regards to the arrest of the 9 persons that you referred to, it will interest you to know that the communities in Plateau State have reached a point where the trust level between them and the security agencies is so low that whenever such arrests are made, the allegation is that the wrong people have been arrested. Now, this is so deep-rooted that even in the current circumstances, depending on the side you talk to in Plateau State, they will tell you that those that were arrested were not responsible for the killings that occurred in Plateau State. And I think that is the difficulty of the situation that we're in at the moment, that we need to reverse as quickly as possible. The trust that the communities have in the security agencies has been depleted to a point where even when arrests are made, you hear conspiracy theories coming up. So it makes it extremely difficult for the law enforcement agencies, for the security forces to carry out their work in that circumstances. Prosecuting those persons, who I believe honestly are pawns, they are not the real instigators. For us to identify those real instigators, intelligence needs to come in. So while I believe that those persons too should be prosecuted, what is even more important is to identify the instigators using intelligence and then put out those intelligence as best as you can in public, and then of course we prosecute them. If we don't do that, then sadly this cycle is not going to end. The deterrence element within our criminal justice system and the traditional justice system has failed almost completely, and the best way to reverse that and ensure that that deterrence is reinvigorated is to use intelligence, identify the instigators, identify those that are bringing in weapons or even contracting these criminal elements, present that evidence in a competent court of jurisdiction, and then have that competent court of jurisdiction prosecute the person. It's not the role of the military. Yes, the police and the other internal security agencies can play that role, but it will be a combination of them and our intelligence agencies. And I'm hoping that the presidency will pick this up, issue tasking orders with clear mandates and timelines for the production of this type of evidence and for the prosecution of both the instigators, those that are involved in gun running, and then anyone who has a hand in the carnage that we're seeing in Plateau State, irrespective of his religious or ethnic identity.
Right. And because you've talked about intelligence and reacting to the last attack in December, the Chief of Defense Staff said the Nigerian Army did not have sufficient intelligence to foil some of these attacks. I'd like to know, and for better perspective, what is the place of or significance of intelligence in all this?
Intelligence is at the center of any security operation. If you get it right, a significant percentage of that success will be attributed to intelligence.
Have we been getting it right?
Again, I'm a private individual, but I can tell you that I run a firm, Beacon Security Intelligence Limited. We have a requisite of intelligence. And we know, for instance, we're able to tell you what is happening on the plateau. A lot of what I've said is based on the intelligence that is available to me, and that's just a private individual using mainly open sources. The government has at its disposal closed sources that I can never, claim I have. So if the intelligence community is doing its work right, which unfortunately I don't know, even if I know, I'm not going to say it in public, then I want to think that we've got the intelligence. We know who is behind this. We know who the instigators are. And of course, we know we have the evidence to support any statement. Why we're not doing that? Hopefully when you invite those that are in government, you can ask them that question. But on a more serious note, intelligence is generated through six elements within the intelligence cycle. And I know, for instance, that even at the state level, the operation, I think Rainbow it's called, is supposed to be an intelligence element that is feeding into the federal intelligence structure. We have the early warning systems. Plateau State has one of the best structures for early warning systems in Nigeria. Then at the federal level, you have its own early warning systems. Now, all of these are supposed to fit into the intelligence cycle. Then, if I start naming the government departments that have a mandate for the collection of intelligence, the State Security Service is one of them, the Defense Intelligence Agency. As far as internal intelligence is concerned, all of these have agents in Plateau State. The police too have an intelligence wing. That recently the Inspector General of Police empowered by, I think, deploying Assistant Commissioners of Police to head their units. So all of these are government departments that have the mandate for the collection of intelligence and that are very active in Plateau State. Each of the military units, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, should have intelligence wings as well that have the mandate for collection of intelligence. So on that basis, I can tell you with all sense of responsibility that we don't lack intelligence. There's supposed to be an intelligence fusion center in the Office of the National Security Advisor, where all of these organizations that I've mentioned are supposed to feed in their intelligence. So hopefully the picture is there, the evidence is there, and I've not even spoken about the cyber component of intelligence that I know we also have capabilities for that. Earlier when I spoke about open intelligence, then in today's world you also have the geomapping component where you can use geographical elements to gather intelligence. There's the signal intelligence. We all have these capabilities, I know. So I doubt if the challenge is one of intelligence. Again, I hope that when you invite a government official, you can ask those questions. Perhaps they will be able to tell you in clear terms. At my level, I know that we don't lack the capability for gathering intelligence.
All right, Dr. Adamu, let's take a break so I can allow you to take a glass of water. Tonight I've been speaking with a security expert and Managing Director of Beacon Consulting Limited. Tonight we're focused on the continued killings in Plateau State. We'll take a break and I will be right back. Please stay with us.
There is always more to a story than the screaming headline. The part of a story that is not told casts a shadow. It's like the part of an object that is not reached by light. On TVC News, I'm able to explore the many angles there are to a story, talking to stakeholders, asking the difficult questions, and digging for facts. I believe the viewers are able to make a better decision if they're well informed and understand not just a part, but the complete story. TVC News, first with breaking news.
It's the most visited state in Africa. As the fifth largest economy on the continent, covering Lagos and its government is no mean feat. It's a busy beat. We go beyond the cutting of tapes to traveling far into the deep.
I want to thank the Lagos State government for the healthcare facility
to bring stories.
Welcome back, everyone. This is still Politics Tonight, and Dr. Kabiru Adamu, a security expert and managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited, is still with us on the program as we focus on the continued killings in Plateau State. Dr. Adamu, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas, has reacted to this recent attack. It says, upon resumption next Tuesday, the House of Reps will hold a security summit. What are your expectations?
Okay, first off, and with due respect to the Speaker of House of Rep, I don't think what we need at the moment is a security summit. I am aware that the National Assembly has held several security summits. I, by virtue of a role I played in the 9th National Assembly, participated in one of such summits. His peer then on the 9th Assembly, who is the current Chief of Staff, also headed and and chaired one of the security summits that was held in the National Assembly. And I can tell you that there is no lack of knowledge of what the issues are as far as national security is concerned in Nigeria. So instead of, for lack of a better word, wasting taxpayers' money in holding a summit, I think what is important is to come up with an implementation strategy. In other words, he could come up with an ad hoc committee of especially leadership of the various committees that have responsibility for security, to tell them to harmonize previous recommendations and reports that those committees have, or those conferences that were held by the National Assembly, and then to now find out, because I know that at the end of those conferences, recommendations and in some instances, the National Assembly actually sat on them and then deliberated and then submitted outcomes and positions which were taken to the executive arm of government. So what would probably be useful to Nigerians and value for money, or the money we don't even have at the moment, is to identify which of those recommendations have so far been implemented. Why were they not implemented? What is the role of the National Assembly in ensuring the implementation of some of the recommendations? Because the reality is that some of these recommendations require constitutional change. As an example, everybody in Nigeria at the moment, well, not everybody, a lot of us in Nigeria at the moment are calling for state policing. That requires some level of constitutional change. This is a no-brainer. Another one that is also a no-brainer is the Commission for Small Arms and Light Weapons. It is shocking that almost, I think about, if I'm right, almost 15 years or thereabout, that ECOWAS has recommended each of its member states to have a commission for small arms and light weapons. Until date, we do not have a functional commission. What we have is one that is operating, I think, illegally, that is claiming they are waiting for presidential accent, but then still have an office, have collected monies from people, and I think perhaps they should even be interrogated. And then the other one that is a center that is operating under the Office of the National Security Advisor. But what we need, given the proliferation of small arms and light weapons in Nigeria, is a commission, just like has been recommended in ECOWAS and that all other 14 ECOWAS member states. And that role and responsibility is in the National Assembly to engage with the president and encourage the president, convince him to have that commission. So again, there are so many of these points that I can list that instead of holding a conference, that should be done. The second thing I think is also absolutely important is perhaps to strengthen the committees on security. By virtue of the fact that I've engaged with National Assembly, I know that those committees need capacity development. Security is not just anybody's market as it were to go in. Persons have been appointed as chairman of committees with responsibility for oversight on security, but frankly, in my honest opinion, they need their capacity to be developed. So perhaps instead of using that money, send them on trainings, engage practitioners with expertise that can help train them so that the oversight role that they play when during the oversight functions that they do would be better in terms of the outcome. I want to really emphasize this. The drivers of insecurity in Nigeria, all those things that make people commit crime, the poverty level, name them. No other agency of government has a role to reduce that like the National Assembly if they play their role and ensure that the budget is implemented in the manner that it's been set out. And corruption is reduced in the entire process. Perhaps we'll have power. Perhaps our infrastructure will flow better. Perhaps small and medium-scale industries would function better. And that means some of the drivers of insecurity will be addressed at their root causes. Our local government system that is not working, the National Assembly plays its role. So my point is, and with due respect to him, we don't need a conference. We know what the problem is. Implement the recommendations of previous conferences that have been held at the National Assembly and save taxpayers' money.
Right. Dr. Damu, I find your points very instructive and crucial because I remember after the December massacre on the Plateau, the Senate summoned heads of military and security over that attack. while the House of Reps also called for a probe, and we're still holding on and waiting for positive results on that. But then recently you've advocated for restorative and transformative justice. How will this restore peace on the plateau? And please correct me if I'm wrong. Restorative justice means dialogue. Don't you think this has been explored again and again?
Let me start with the first part of your question, the invitation by the parliament. To an extent, the parliamentary style that we have in Nigeria was brought from the US with contraptions here and there. In my honest opinion, and I haven't seen that in the United States, yes, parliamentary inquiries are done in a very professional manner. In other words, if any of the security forces are coming to the parliament, they're jittery because the parliament is prepared. The kind of questions that the parliament would ask them, the outcomes of those inquiries would even cause them to lose their job. That's not what we have in Nigeria. We have sessions that are merely, largely political, actually, where questions are asked without depth, and then they leave. We need more than that. Earlier on, when I spoke about improving the capacity of the committees, I'm very serious about it. If they don't know the questions to ask, then perhaps the sessions will be one where the outcome will not be useful to anyone. So I'm hoping that type of invitation would even reduce. We don't need it. What we need is better oversight functions. And if they continue with the oversight functions, I'm hoping that they would not even need those invitations. Because remember that for every period they go, they visit this ministries, departments, and agencies, they engage with them. And that is where those technical and critical questions, it's only when there are serious issues, for instance, the bombing that happened in Kaduna, that perhaps we see those type of parliamentary inquiries, and then they invite, the particular security department that was responsible for that. But for the type of invitation that I've seen, I honestly don't think it's necessary. It's not useful as far as I'm concerned to the nation. With regards to the second part of your question, both restorative and transformative justice, yes, it's to a larger extent it's about dialogue, but more importantly, it's also about peace building. The essence of this that type of justice is to allow the two communities air their grievances. Up until today, I can bet you, if you invite certain elements within the Plateau State government, they will still tell you that the harder communities are killing for killing's sake. Now, you would never have restorative justice if you continue to isolate a particular community, irrespective of whether that grievance is logical or not. Invite them, listen to them. If it's illogical, explain to them, allow them to convince themselves that it is illogical, but give them a listening ear. Allow them to air whatever grievance that they have. They are burying their deaths. If you are following up developments, you find out that they are also being killed. You find out that their property is also being destroyed. So they also need to be allowed to air their grievances. The two sides need to come together and accept the fact that they've done enough carnage to themselves. The killings is a killing on both sides. The destruction of property is on both sides. Now, will they forgive themselves? Or do they need some types of compensation for what has been lost? That's what the government would need to decide. If the decision is to forgive themselves, like the immediate past government attempted to do when he publicly sought for forgiveness from all persons of Plateau State, perhaps that's the channel to go. So it's a little bit more than dialogue. It requires acceptance of fault. It requires either compensation or forgiveness, as the case may be, and then it requires a pact, a well-documented pact by both sides to say, okay, what has happened in the past on the basis of either forgiveness or compensation would be, we've passed that stage. We're not going to revisit it again. And the new phase that we're going to open is a phase where peace building will be living together, just like we lived together in the past, respecting each other's differences, respecting each other's, inclinations, respecting each other's livelihoods, and where there are transgressions, this is the path that will follow. So a lot of this is really, the beginning stage will be the dialogue, but all of these elements that I've mentioned would be followed. I know that there is this peace body in Plateau State, I've forgotten the name, that was institutionalized. I don't know why the current government abandoned it. It's perhaps they should consider revisiting that peace body, so that all of these elements that I've mentioned may be pursued by them.
So, I mean, this recent attacks have increased the call for the establishment of state or community policing. What's your view?
So yes, I referred to this when I was mentioning the things that I think the Speaker of the House of Rep can do. There is this rising demand for state policing. I think given the level of the dearth of policing in Nigeria, we need to revamp our policing approach. Now, if state policing is what we've agreed to pursue, what are the safeguards that we're going to put in place to reduce or eliminate the possibility of the state governors hijacking? But I think that's the most cogent concern. I used to have that concern until I recently met someone who introduced to me elements of safeguard that can be embedded into the state policing system to reduce the governors from hijacking them and using them for political purposes or to achieve objectives that will hurt our national existence. Some of us haven't forgotten what happened in 1967 that led to the Civil War. And so we're going to go that route, which I think we're right for. What remains is for us as a country to come up with safeguard measures. And I can tell you some of the safeguard measures. We need to strengthen democracy at the state level. The legislative arm of government at the state level, the judicial arm of government at the state level should have their voice. At the moment, most of the states, those two arms don't have their voice. They are more or less in the pocket of the governor. So imagine a situation where the governor also has the control of the monopoly of the use of force at the state. What would happen? Other safeguards can also include at the federal level, where, for instance, there will be a checklist and there will be an evaluation periodically. So it will be licenses issued to the state with clear jurisdictional mandates. And where those checklists are evaluated and there are failures, then that licenses can be withdrawn, as an example. So I am very supportive of state policing, but with safeguards to prevent their usage in the manner that led to the Civil War in 1967.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up tonight, let's talk about care for survivors and those displaced. What do you think is the best way to care for them?
Number one is to document them. And again, this is important that on both sides, not documented in one side and ignoring the other. It must be on both sides. And then, of course, what the state government can do. The development partners are doing amazingly well. And I think Borno State has a model that perhaps states like Plateau State can also borrow from. Come up with a plan where they document development partners that are happy to support them. And then, of course, the federal government should also come in and help cater to their needs. There are immediate needs, and then there are also long-term needs, resettling them. But beyond that, and this is one of the reasons why I find the very simplistic explanation that this is resource-based quite amazing. If it's resource-based and we think it's driven by land, what is stopping the state government from issuing titles of land to the people? So that at least if you have a title that is sanctioned and endorsed by the government, whether you've been chased out of that land, you have an element to say this is your land. And even if somebody comes to settle in it, tomorrow you can go back and show evidence that is your land. So I think governance has a lot of responsibility in this element. Several states in the Federation came up with this geographical information system where they use technology to come up with systems for titling lands. I'm not sure where Plateau State is in that regard.
Right, so quickly before I let you go, what's your advice to the federal government on the lasting way to secure Nigeria?
So number one is let's respect the provisions of the Constitution. There are certain hierarchies and elements within our Constitution. An example is the federal councils, the National Defense Council, the National Security Council, the National Police Council. That security provision, the architecture that we use consistently, it's there. People say we use architecture without really understanding what it means. Some of us actually know what it means. There are consoles within the security architecture. Those consoles are there for a purpose. They are meant to sit and discuss and agree decisions. Those that are behind the framing of our constitution, when they put those consoles, there was a reason why they put them. Now, let's start with respecting the provisions of the constitution and start convening those councils as made necessary. So that's number one. Number two, let's introduce accountability within the security management, public security management system, where mandates are not respected, where killings occur, somebody should be held accountable. Now, that holding accountable could mean just suspension. It could mean, in some instances,
Dr. Adamu, sadly, we're out of time. I'm sure we will continue this conversation some other time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've been speaking with Dr. Kabir Adamu, a security expert, managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited. Tonight, we focused on the continued killings in Plateau. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Always a pleasure having you on Politics Tonight. Please have a great weekend.
And you, the pleasure is mine.
And thank you very much for watching. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But the conversation continues from here. Get in touch with us on X at TVC News NG and at Olajumoke using the hashtag Politics Tonight. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. Have a great weekend.
There is always more to a story than the scrimmage line. The part of a